I was born into a family of five. Me, my older brother, and my older sister, and of course my parents. And I was a kid of the 70s and the 80s, and this early part of my childhood for as long as I can remember. I just remember that every summer we drove somewhere. When I was a really little kid, we had like the Brady Bunch style station wagon, the kind that had that way back. So my brother and my sister are sitting in there. I'm in the way back, no seatbelt, nothing. We're like at a stoplight. There's a cop next to us. I'm waving at the cops, and they're waving back. That was the 70s. That's how we rolled. And for some crazy reason, as we got older, my parents decided to get a smaller car. So in the summer of 1987, we loaded up a 1985 Nissan Maxima sedan to drive from the San Francisco Bay Area to a family reunion in Yellowstone. A 13-year-old, me, in the middle. Doesn't matter how tall you are. When you're the youngest, you get the middle. You get a lifetime appreciation that coach isn't that bad when you fly, but the middle of the seat, brother to the left, sister to the right, parents in the front. It is like, I have like PTSD from that squeeze. And we're driving. That's a long way. I Googled it, getting ready for this, and it was like nearly 1,000 miles to drive there. And long drive. And this, again, is the 1980s. And our family road trips had always been marked by listening to a lot of music, because usually we were traveling, in urban areas, and as far back as the 8-track, like a steady stream of John Denver and Barry Manilow, and later in the 80s, Hall & Oates. And if we could find a radio station, we were like big top 40 fans. This was the age of like solid gold before there was, and then the heart of MTV. So we loved all this pop music, And then we're teenagers, so we got our Walkman, right? But like your children, my children, they will never know the limits of a Duracell battery. I do, because on that long road trip, sooner or later, your battery dies. And the person in the front is in charge. Normally, this was not a problem, because my mom's taste was kind of the same as the kids. With maybe not as much hard rock and metal or hip hop, but, relatively cool. But my father, who had never been into music for some reason, he was around my age at the time, I think he was like early midlife crisis, had discovered Paul Simon's Graceland. And he made us listen to it over and over and over. You Can Call Me Out, Boy in the Bubble, Diamonds on Soles of Her Shoes, all that. By the time we got to Montana, I was just as excited to not have to hear that record again as I was to get together with my cousins, which I was really looking forward to, because we were going there for a family reunion. My mom's got, older brother, older sister, younger sister. They all have 2 kids each, so it's like a good stream of cousins, and it ran the range from 4 years old to 20. It ran from my little cousin Elliot, who I just adored, because I didn't have a little brother or a little sister like his sister, so I could, it changed the dynamics up. I got to be a big brother. My older brother got to look up to my cousin Rob from Oklahoma, who was like Matthew McConaughey before there was Matthew McConaughey. He was slick. So while my brother's off worshiping him, Rob's little brother, my cousin Tom, who doesn't have a little brother, doesn't mind having me around. He's the same age as my brother, Only in my eyes, of course, he's the same as my brother. He's not the same, because he's cool. My brother sucks, and he's cool. So when we're not doing family activities together, we're all hanging out, it's a free range. We're in Montana. What could possibly happen, right? Well, so I'm hanging around with Tom, and we're there like a day and a half, and we meet these 2 teenage girls. And Tom gave me the best advice I'd ever gotten to that point in my young life. He said, "I'm gonna need you to lie." When they ask how old we are, you are not 13, almost 14. You are a solid 15. And I'm like, they are never going to buy this. I still got braces. I haven't started high school yet. But, people accept the reality you give to them. And, I'm 15, looking forward to my second year of high school. And these girls, Jen and Lisa, and they're really, really nice, and they're really, really cool. And we run into them after they had just come back from town, and they say to me and Tom, they go, "We just bought a couple of new cassettes, at this little music shop. Do you want to come over to our room and hang out tonight and listen to music?" And I'm like, Tom? And Tom's like, yeah, we'll be there. And he's like, you just need to be cool. And for me, that's not nearly enough advice. So I go to my big sister. I'm like, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? What do I do? And she's like, okay, here's the deal. You guys are going to listen to music. When it gets to a slow song, if you like this girl, just, maybe try to hold her hand or something like that. And here's a dirty little secret about 80s rock. Like, song number 3 or 4 into a cassette, that's usually the love song. So I had a little time. I had a little lead up. She puts in Heart's Bad Animals. It finally gets to that How Do I Get You Alone song. And I make my move. I'm holding her hand. And then by the second verse, we're like kissing. I'm making out with a girl for the first time in my life. I had just spent all of middle school wondering when this moment would happen, figuring that it would probably be, I don't know, like at the like a dance, middle school dance. I did not anticipate it happening in Montana with my cousin in the room. But I'm totally psyched anyway, right? And then the music ends, so does the night. And her name was Jen, and we exchanged phone numbers and addresses and said we'll write to each other and we'll call each other. And of course we never did, right? But the kicker from that is every time I hear that song, I'm reminded of the very beginning of what would be a long and complicated relationship with power ballads and the opposite sex, and usually both at the same time, and that hasn't stopped. So the families break up, reunion is over, and our family, we're back to our little nuclear family of 5, and the next stop is Salt Lake City, Utah. And we're so happy to get back into a city where there's a radio station so that we don't have to listen to Graceland anymore. And over the radio, we hear, Bon Jovi at the Salt Palace tonight. Good seats still available. And my head nearly explodes. Because this was slippery when wet era, living on a prayer. I'm a cowboy, steel horse I ride era Bon Jovi. And it was my favorite band on the planet. And it had sold out so fast back home that I couldn't get tickets. And my sister says, why don't we try to get tickets? I'll take Jay. It'll be a really good time. We'll have fun. And my parents said, no, the vacation's about spending time together, and if you go do that, you're breaking off from the group. And we ended up doing like nothing. We went to the Tabernacle, and we come back to the hotel, and me and my sister are still really bummed out, so we go take a walk to this nearby playground, kind of bummed that we lost the good fight. And just me and my sister, my big sister, 5 years older than me, and she says, hey, Jay, have you ever smoked a cigarette? And I said, no, I haven't smoked a cigarette yet, or anything like that. A few of my friends have, but I haven't. She's like, oh, that probably means you haven't smoked weed. And I go, yeah, I haven't smoked weed. She goes, well, do you want to? Now, you have to remember, this is the 1980s. I had grown up on a steady diet of everybody from Nancy Reagan to Mr. T to Ricky Schroeder to the lead singer of Motley Crue in a Rock Against Drugs commercial telling me to just say no. And I was part of the 5% of my generation that actually bought that shit. So I got self-righteous in that moment. I mean, I knew my sister had been a bit rebellious, but the bigger thing about that was that in Ronald Reagan's America, I had been sold on the notion that the first person that tried to get me to do drugs was going to be like the boogeyman. It wasn't supposed to be my sister. And I was heartbroken and angry. And I stormed off, went back to the hotel, and barely spoke 2 words to her for the rest of the trip home. I did not know at that time that that was going to be the last long family road trip that we ever took. Because the next summer, my brother had just finished high school. He was getting ready to go to college. I got my first summer job. My sister moved out, later got married. We never did that sort of thing again. And that trip has always stuck with me for that reason, but even bigger is because I realized that that trip, that week and a half, was when my childhood ended and something else started. And it wasn't just because I got offered drugs and I made out with a girl and had a permanent erection for the next 4 years. It was bigger than that. It was that I began to see my family through a different lens. My immediate family, my extended family. Like when we all went on a group rafting trip in Montana, and I noticed that my Aunt Pat was the only one of the women the aunts who said, I'm going on this raft trip. You watch my kids. Her kids were 4 and 6, and she's like, you do it. I'm going. And I just thought that was kind of badass. And she's still kind of badass. And she became my favorite aunt on that trip, and that's never changed over 30 years. I noticed for the first time that 3-year age difference, almost to the day, we're 3 years and 1 day apart, me and my older brother, I started to realize I didn't want his approval anymore. I didn't care what he thought. I noticed kind of for the first, my sister was just really not a good influence. I've never smoked pot, ever, because every time I smell it at a show or on the fine streets of Portland, I go back to that playground, and it breaks my heart all over again. But I also remember her every time I hear a Bon Jovi song, because we were in that playground because she tried to fight a fight on my behalf. And 2 years later, when they rolled around on the New Jersey tour, and I still couldn't drive, she took me to the show. She ditched me for 2 guys that she met there that had weed, but she took me to the show. I noticed for the first time on that trip, when we had a big family barbecue, that my dad could have about 2 or 3 beers to every one that my uncles would have. I noticed that the combination of free booze and gambling when you're traveling through Nevada and my dad, well, I thought the whole idea was stupid, but then I realized later maybe it was just not a good idea for him. And, I gotta say, I love Graceland. That is a hell of an album. I take it on many, many a road trip, and anytime I hear a song from it, I think of that road trip, and I think about my dad, and I'll be thinking of him in that road trip next month when I'm at Mo to sing Paul Simon, because I was gonna take him, and I was 3 years too late. I remember that road trip not because of things I saw. I wish I knew, the mystique of Old Faithful. I wish I'd paid more attention to the tabernacle, but all I got of that is like old photos my mom took from the photomat. Instead, I remember my family and how much they resemble people and places and towns along the way, and how they are well-intentioned and sometimes poorly designed. They are imperfect, but they have this genuine history and a beauty, and I love that. I love that so much. Thank you.